Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Gavin, what do you think? What did you guys group talk about?
Okay, so what we talked about was that yes, the U.S. can morally create and maintain a relationship with China.
Why?
Okay, so first we talked about how with the UN, the U.S.'s involvement, the China's involvement, but also the benefits that they both gave. If their relationship, there's more beneficial factors to China and for the U.S. than there is conflict, then they can find a way to maintain a solid relationship.
Can you think of anything immoral about our relationship with China?
Well, the fact that China's communist and the beliefs that U.S. have is contradictory to what China believes. So then U.S. public belief could be against it.
So how do you say that's moral if their entire system we believe is immoral?
Because even though their system we believe is immoral with the public, because we're finding a way to be diplomatic, it can work.
Okay. So what is he trying to get at here? Anyone? Juliet.
Maybe that it might be necessary. Maybe that it might be necessary to put aside these differences for the sake of diplomacy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so like a subordinate goal.
Okay. Well, what could you look back more recently and say, well, this might be a better moral choice than what we were doing before? Josh.
Okay, so
Do you want to go with what you were thinking before, or do you want to answer my question?
I didn't understand your question.
My question is, we're pursuing detente, right? Why could that be a more moral choice than what we were doing before?
I think just because morally, I guess, think about it as like different moral impression, but generally when you're talking about morality, it's a lot more better morally to, rather than taking action, going to war, that you do it diplomatically and take the high road kind of thing. So I think, in essence, when the way we're pursuing detente, we're trying to avoid conflict and instead trying to go more diplomatic.
Okay, so you're saying by avoiding military, right, and our soldiers dying, we are just coming off of the Vietnam War, right? Maybe it is more moral to have a more diplomatic relationship. What could you say is immoral about that diplomatic relationship, though? So yes, no military. We're trying to do something better, but what could be immoral about that relationship?
Well, so in the United States, we believe, in like kind of like limits, like working hours, or like wage. You should have a certain amount of wage. You should limit the working hours. Like almost like
human rights.
Yeah, human rights. But then we almost exploit the Chinese workforce, which doesn't have those limitations, so that we can have lower prices. And is it moral that we're benefiting from the lower prices and the consumer goods and stuff off of someone else's hard labor?
So you're saying, is it moral for us to economically benefit from this relationship, ignoring the human rights abuses? So are you saying yes, immoral, or no, immoral?
Yeah, I feel that's immoral and that something should be done to try to
What
change that
could we do if we have the public saying, you know what, this is immoral for us to have this relationship with China?
I guess maybe, this would be kind of like a hard thing to do, but maybe set our own kind of limits, so instead of paying the absolutely lowest, but based on capitalism and the market and stuff, maybe we set an amount where it's okay, you have to pay this much, so that money trickles down to the workforce in China, maybe.
Okay, let's go Jenna, then Tyler.
Well, I don't think that the public would ever see that as immoral, because what he was talking about is the economically exploiting the amount of workforce
say the American public is okay if there's abuses going on in other countries as long as economically it benefits us.
Well, I'm saying like, yeah, as a majority, because the businesses that have like a lot of money and exploit that, they have like enough power to not, like, I guess get that overturned or something where they couldn't do that.
Should it be our government's role to be the moral police there? Like, should the US step up and say, China does some pretty bad things to its people. There are some pretty massive human rights abuses. What could be some options that we do with China if we are trying to make a stand against human rights abuses? What could be some things?
Well, one of the main benefits China gets with diplomatic relations to the U.S. is being in the UN.
Yes.
So the UN could set regulations for human rights, and I think China would be willing to give up some of the human rights it would want to implore, and the UN they'd be willing to give it up because they want to have they want to have a stance over Taiwan, and so I think they'd be willing to give up their human rights in order to stay in the UN and
Okay.
have that veto power.
What have we done with countries in the past that we've said, okay, we don't like your government's treatment of their people, we don't agree with the government's political system, so we're gonna do this. Okay, say it a little louder.
Embargo.
Trade embargo. Why can't we just do a trade embargo with China? Who else did we do a trade embargo with?
Cuba.
Cuba. We have a trade embargo with Iran.
Yeah.
I mean, we pretty much have trade embargoes with any country. Shouldn't say any country. With some countries that we don't agree with, and we're trying to push them in a direction, right? Basically, if you don't treat your people this certain way, we won't trade with you. Do we say that with China?
No.
No. Mikhail?
Well, the problem is we become so interdependent, like economically, that if we embargo China today, our economy would be screwed as well.
So
To put it bluntly, yeah.
So basically, morality can play no role here with economics.
Well, I'm saying we can't use an embargo as like one of those ways in which we would enforce morality, because
So what could we do?
well, if you're establishing diplomatic relations with China, then the whole point of establishing a détente is to ease tensions and allow for negotiations. That's the basis of the détente. And when you finally reach those negotiations, once you've established some sort of influence in China, then you can start having some sort of role in preventing those human rights with the increased influence.
And how has that worked for us?
I tried.
I mean, we know. I know we haven't we will get through the 90s with China, but I don't know, maybe Dante can enlighten us here. Personal experience, but
I've been to China a few times.
hold on. What Nikhil is saying is basically, hey, we open up negotiations, we may be able to massage that relationship so they end up changing maybe their human rights abuses, right? Maybe because of our relationship, they end up changing, right? And could you see that in the 70s? Sure, you could see that, like Nixon thinking that way with Mao. But what has history told us? Dante, have they changed?
Well, the last few times I went to China, I didn't really see any human rights abuses, so I can't really answer that question. But they tell me it's bad in more like rural areas where,
Hold on.
basically in more rural areas that aren't really like fully caught up with modern like philosophies and like the globalization. It's basically a lot of those villages are still living in a cultural revolution kind of like time period where everything is still, controlled or perceived to be controlled by the state, and there's no type of like individual freedom or individual liberty. So I think it more has something to do with just like the society and like how like poverty is affecting the Chinese people more than it is the international affairs of the United States.
Would you say though the government, would it be fair to say the government has done better with their human rights, or no, that's not a fair statement?
In like a very, very like broad sense, yeah, it's definitely gotten better because we can see like in bigger cities like Taiwan and Shanghai or not Taiwan's not a city, but in like Shanghai and like Beijing, it's very like capitalist. If you go there like right now, it very much resembles like a Los Angeles or New York, and so like the standard of living is like fairly high in those cities. But then if you like start to like look at the very like rural parts, then there's virtually like no change like now and then like 4 years ago. So it's like up to like the Chinese government to take and like instead of focusing on presenting the world with like only like Beijing and like Shanghai kind of like scenarios, they have to like work on improving like the very like lower parts of the.
Well, I think with the increased industrialization in China, they have had issues with trying to control thought, yes. They control the internet, they control, right, what the people are trying to communicate. I would say, yeah, Los Angeles and New York with Shanghai, but I mean, we got major pollution issues. Yes?
It's not so bad. It's there. My
We
grandparents
have-
live there. They don't have lung cancer, so I mean,
Yes.
can't be that bad.
They don't have, I mean, there's definitely like poverty issues inside the cities as well, right? Okay. Okay. So now how about, are you okay with the relationship that has been established morally?
I mean,
Would you wish the United States would do more with human rights with China?
I feel like that's not really the United States' job in China, though. Like, it's the Chinese government has its responsibility to the Chinese people, not the American government has its responsibility to the Chinese people.
So you're okay with just having a purely economic relationship with the United States?
So I think that's fair, and that's how it's been in major issues.
There hasn't been any major
Well, it's
issues?
not any like large, significant ones, but it's like.
Every life.
Well, to you, to United States citizens, no, absolutely not. It's been great, right? Has it been great for the Chinese citizens?
Is that not America? So it doesn't matter.
Okay, well let's steer back here. Can we have relationships with these countries on just a singular plane? Like, can we morally just say we are only going to have our economic relationship with China and we're going to ignore the others because it benefits us? We have some people shaking their heads yes, and we have some people shaking their heads no. Alston, yeah.
I believe yes, because like Dante said, it's not up to the United States to decide the fate of other countries. And like, actually, historically speaking, once we do that, that's when we get into conflicts.
So when we, for instance, in 2003 say Saddam Hussein, bad man, he's bad to his people, so we are going to go in and get rid of him.
That's not our job.
That's not our job. So any type of war that we head into where it's a more moral reason we're going into. So for instance, would you have stopped the Holocaust? Okay. You go ahead.